Mr. President.
Senator from Pennsylvania.
Mr. President, I rise to speak about the law enforcement in Pennsylvania and throughout the country. We're just finished up the holiday season, and in my family, as with many of us, I'm sure, we had a wonderful Christmas in our homes, had a wonderful meal, got to watch the kids open their presents. There are a lot of Pennsylvanians and Americans who didn't have the chance to do what we got to enjoy, and they were the law enforcement men and women who were out on the streets in the cold protecting us, as they do day in and day out, because their work goes on 24/7, 365 days a year. Well, just this past Saturday, a number of us gathered on the Independence Mall in Philadelphia. Several hundred people braved a very, very cold and windy day to let the law enforcement officials of Pennsylvania and beyond know just how much we appreciate the sacrifice that they make for us day in and day out. We had a terrific turnout, a very enthusiastic crowd that rallied in support of our police officers. But Mr. President, being a police officer is not just often inconvenient. Sometimes it's very, very dangerous. Last year, there were 115 police officers died in the line of duty. So far, we're 13 days into a new year, and 10 officers have already been shot and wounded. Often, these police officers have been targeted and shot just because of the uniform that they wear. And unfortunately, Pennsylvania is not immune to this problem. Last year, on September 12th, late at night, 2 Pennsylvania state troopers coming in for their shift at work, and Eric Freen was lying in wait, hiding in the woods with a high-powered rifle. He shot and killed Corporal Brian Dixon, and he shot Trooper Alex Douglas, who was grievously wounded. The killer, Eric Freen, didn't know either Corporal Dixon or Trooper Douglas. He shot the 2 police officers simply because they were police officers. And he thought somehow that by killing a cop, he would help spark a revolution. Mr. President, such is the madness that police officers have to face on a regular basis. On any given day, they don't know that they won't have to run into just that kind of insanity. It's important for us to remember that these victims, in this case Corporal Dixon, wasn't just a number, wasn't just a badge. He was a dad, father of 2 young boys. He used to enjoy making toys for his sons. He was a devoted husband who had recently celebrated his 10th wedding anniversary. He was a proud Marine Corps veteran. Now, I'm proud, as Pennsylvanians generally are, of the response of law enforcement to the savage and despicable shooting of these 2 state troopers. Officers from all across Pennsylvania, surrounding states, and even around the country joined in a very intensive, tireless, 7-week-long manhunt. And in the end, they found Eric Freen, and they brought him into custody wearing the handcuffs of Corporal Dixon. He will meet justice. But of course, the story doesn't end there. There was another terrible tragedy just last month in Brooklyn. It was just 5 days before Christmas. Officer Rafael Ramos and Officer Wen John Liu, both murdered in the line of duty. Middle of the afternoon, broad daylight, a gunman approached their marked police vehicle while they sat in the vehicle and shot each police officer point-blank range in the head, killing them both instantly. The motivation of the gunman was very clear. He just wanted to kill any police officer that he could. That day, the gunman posted messages such as, "Take one of ours, let's take 2 of theirs." Another message he posted used the hashtag advocating, "Shoot the police." Well, Officers Ramos and Officer Liu, they weren't just nameless people in uniforms either. Officer Ramos was described by his family and friends as a Puerto Rican kid who grew up on the streets in Queens and never stopped trying to help the people in his community. Officer Ramos had spent the last 10 years of his life studying to become a chaplain, and he was murdered just an hour before his graduation ceremony. Officer Ramos joined the police force at the age of 37. He explained that he saw the streets as his ministry, and that by protecting and serving his community, he was serving God as well. Officer Ramos left behind his wife and 2 sons, 19-year-old Jaden and 13-year-old Justin. Officer Lou was the other victim that day, and in many ways, Officer Lou is the epitome of the American dream. He was a young boy who, at age 12, came to America with his family from China. He was a teenage boy who left the game occasionally so that he could do the shopping for his family's groceries. He was a young man who was so inspired by the heroism he saw on September 11th that he decided that he would become a police officer. He was the police officer who called home every night to let his dad know that he had finished a day of work safely. Every night, that is, except until December 20th, when the phone call never came. Officer Lou is survived by his wife, who he had married just 3 months before. The response of law enforcement to the savage murder of Officers Ramos and Officer Lou can also make every American proud. There were over 25,000 police officers who traveled from across America and parts of Canada to attend the funeral services last month. So, Mr. President, we can never really fully repay the debt of the men and women who sacrificed their very lives in protecting us. But there are small things we could do to help the families that they leave behind. And I want to call on Congress to take one small step toward that goal. We should pass the Children of Fallen Heroes Scholarship Act, and we should do so soon. The Children of Fallen Heroes Scholarship Act provides, very simple, it simply says, any child whose parent dies in the line of duty as a member of the armed services or as a public safety officer, such a child will be entitled to the maximum permissible Pell Grant scholarship for their attendance in college. Now, 5 years ago, the House of Representatives unanimously passed this legislation. Now, my fellow Pennsylvanian Senator Bob Casey, Senator Casey, plans to reintroduce this legislation. I will be co-sponsoring this legislation when he does, and I call on Congress to pick up where it left off back in 2010 and to promptly enact the Children of Fallen Heroes Scholarship Act. Mr. President, I also want to take a brief moment to address the recent spate of protests that we have seen. People who have gone to the streets across the country, often harshly criticizing police officers. And let me be clear, people want to protest, they have a right to protest. And I would never challenge their right to say what's on their mind, to convey whatever message they'd like to convey. But I would hope that they would keep a few basic facts in mind as they consider or in fact carry out a protest. One is, any human institution is going to be imperfect. That is the nature of humanity. It consists of human beings, so it therefore will be imperfect. But the fact is that the overwhelming majority of police officers are honest, hardworking, decent Americans, and they're motivated by the desire to serve and protect the community in which they live, and they don't have a racist bone in their bodies. So my message to law enforcement is, I understand how demoralizing it must have been recently to see some of these protests, to hear some of the outrageous and slanderous statements that have been made. But these protesters don't speak for most Americans. The fact is, a big majority of Pennsylvanians, and I suspect a big majority of Americans, know that every day the 780,000 men and women across America who put on a blue uniform and put on their badge are answering the call of the people in need when we need them most. And they put themselves in great danger to serve all of us. When other people choose to run away from danger, they're the ones who have to run toward it. And so just as you, the law enforcement community of America, have stood by the families of Corporal Dixon and Officer Ramos and Officer Lou, I want you to know that America stands with you. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.